Being here. All right, thank you so much for having me this evening. This is the third time I've come to the PTSA DEI committee, and I'm always so impressed by the amount of people who take time out of their evening. It's a beautiful night. I'm sure there's a lot of places that you could be, and so it's a great tribute to everyone here that you're taking time to learn more about things that are going on in our school and be engaged as parents and guardians and community members. So first and foremost, we're all here because our children are the most important things to us. So I have two little girls who attend Pittsford schools, and I know that every single person who's here is here because they care about the safety of their children. And we all come from different viewpoints and different lenses, but that's our commonality, and that's what really grounds us in this work. So I am going to speak about a couple of the board policies that have been in place here in Pittsford. And I'm also going to wrap that into a larger picture around support for our LGBTQIA+ youth in our schools. And part of the reason why we call out these types of supports is that we know both nationally and locally that students that fall into the LGBTQIA+ community and their families are not only targets of more hateful actions, language, but also that some of the things that they have to struggle with along the way in order to just be themselves and be a part of our schools, our community, also can leave them with some pretty significant mental health needs. And so looking at our own data, we know that our students need extra support. They have told us that, and that's something that's not unique to Pittsford. So we see those data trends across the nation. So a couple of things, just briefly going to go through, as you've probably seen before, our PCSD core values. And as I said, we're all here because we're student-centered. We care about our own children and all the children in our community. And tonight, as Crystal was saying, our goal is to have a supportive environment for all. It's not to judge different mindsets or viewpoints, but it's to give information that's factual so that people can walk away with hopefully more information. I know every time I attend an event like this, I walk away better with more information that can help me to do my job better or to parent better. So we thank you in advance for your productive questions. That's really our goal tonight, is to be able to answer questions. And you should know as parents and guardians that tonight is kind of more of an event. It's great to be able to have time to be able to get together like this, but it's also, we're here 365 days out of the year to be able to support our community. So you can reach out anytime. You don't have to wait until there's a power hour or a presentation. You can always feel free to contact me, your child's principal, school counselor, the superintendent. That is actually our job, is to be able to respond to the community and give feedback and answer any questions that you might have about your child or about our schools. So a few things we're going to talk about. I will get right away to the practices and some of the policies that are in place. I'll talk about some of the other supports that are available for our students, including some of the training that's been going on for quite some time, I'd say probably the last decade, and some additional next steps. So we have some additional ways that we can support students here in Pittsford that we'll be working on starting already with our Inclusivity Advisory Committee. So a couple of the policies, there's actually many state laws that help to ground us in what are things that we need to be as a public school doing for our students. And so from those laws comes state guidance, and that guidance helps to break down even further what are the steps that schools need to be taking to be in accordance with the state education law. And from those, we build school policy. So if you've ever watched a board meeting, you know that there's pretty much policy that is brought to and approved usually through almost every single meeting that we have. So as Crystal mentioned, we had the Student Gender Identity Committee, and that group involved parents, school administrators, teachers. We worked through the Children's Institute to be able to help support that process, and we had students as a part of that as well. And like any other policy of this nature, we then take it on a little tour. So we actually went to the GSA committees to be able to speak to more students at the secondary level. It goes to our elementary and secondary leadership teams, our central office team, our Inclusivity Advisory Committee. So many, many eyes and lots of good brain sweat went into the language in our policy. So I would direct you, if you want more information on the New York State education law, this is actually not new law for schools. So you may, if you look at other neighboring districts, you'll probably notice that they have policies very similar to this one that could range back 5, 6, 7 years ago. And that's because we do tend to use the same BOCES policy agency to be able to give us a framework to be able to start policies that align with state education law. And then we're able to tweak those and change them to really fit the culture of our schools. So all the way back from 2015, we have laws in New York State that give us guidance and guidance from the state around how to make sure that we have environments in our school that are free of sex discrimination in accordance with the Dignity for All Students Act for all of our students. So one policy that was actually a pretty cut and dry one is the gender neutral restroom policy. So that was approved, I believe, last summer, following a law that came about in New York State that said any single use restroom in a school must be labeled as gender neutral. So that means if you previously in a school, we had a men's room and a women's room, they would now, and they are single stall, so for single use, they would become gender neutral. So you may have seen that change in your child's school. If we had a staff restroom that was single stall, in either case, those would both become gender neutral. And so that's happened across our schools, which has been great because it's given more options to all students. It's not just students who are gender non-conforming or non-binary who use those gender neutral restrooms. There's a lot of students who prefer to have a more private space. And then the one that we're going to draw out a little bit further is the one, I know that there's been questions brought out online. We've watched some social media posts back and forth around the student gender identity policy. And that's the one I was referring to earlier and that Crystal was referring to that was approved back in January. That was part of the work of a large collaborative team that took place probably around 7 months or so worth of work. And you'll see very similar policies in districts across the area. And so I'm just going to pull out a couple of pieces of that. The entire policy is online with all of our policies. A couple of the pieces that I think I've seen online are of most interest and where we've done the most work come first in the names and pronouns areas, which really get at student records and how we make sure that records are reflecting what students want to be referred to as. So in New York State, if a student asks to be referred to as a certain name and pronoun, by law, we do start using that name and pronoun in school. The policy really breaks out more how we involve parents, how we work as a team to be able to have some of those conversations in a really thoughtful way about what that now means for a student in school. Some students only want a couple people to know in the school. Some students want to have everybody immediately begin using their new names and pronouns. And so I think if you take one thing away from this, you should know that anytime that a student's going through a gender or name change process, that's a very thoughtful decision and process that we follow at school and that we work with families to help bring forward. So this is not about a child walking into school and saying, I'm thinking I want to be a boy today, and so I'm going to use the boys' restroom and you're going to call me this. This is a process that really involves lots of people, not the least of which are families. And so this year, what we were able to do is really help. We have an internal document we shared with our Inclusivity Advisory Committee at our meeting last month. They thought it was more interesting than I thought they would, but I think it helps to share or to show, well, I have a blurred little screen, so that doesn't help you. But we have quite a process around what we do internally. And I could probably pull that up on my screen in a moment if we need to, but it really talks about from the time when we find out that a student is asserting that they would like to use a different name or pronoun, what process is followed. So there's the building process, which involves whoever that staff member is that the person goes to. How do we make sure that counselors and administrators are involved so we can start involving family and determining what level of change needs to be made? Are we having a legal name change? Is this just a name change that we can make within our system? And so once that happens, there's actually the other side of the page is all of the different processes that we have to follow behind the scenes that actually can happen somewhat quickly. The process part, when it comes to the tech side of things, is the easy part. It's the conversations at first about what does this mean for the student that are much more in depth. Once those conversations have been had and the building administrator reaches out actually to me those changes are initiated through my office in student services, and our district registrar begins that process of actually changing everything from Infinite Campus, which is our student data management system, to transportation, to all the different applications that students use, typing pals, their email, all those pieces, so that students are not confronted then with a name and a gender that they no longer are going by in school. So that's why it's important to have this be such a thoughtful process, because once that changes, that change will be seen on classroom rosters, all throughout every, it'll come home with student report cards when they get their bus assignments in the fall. All of those things will fall in alignment together. So this is something we certainly can post online if anybody's interested in it. I don't know how to do this so that it doesn't blur, but it's something we've worked on this year, because you're gonna take my word for it. And it really has been very, very helpful, because we have quite a few gender and name change requests that come in. I would say probably, depending on the month, we might get 3 or 4 within a month, spread out across our 9 schools. And so by the time it gets to the place where we're actually making a change in the student record, that's been a long process of working through with the classroom, with obviously the student, their family, their counselor. And so I'll be able to say a little bit more about that, because what we'd like to do is be able to support that process even more and be a little more proactive in some of the different ways we can support students as they are transitioning. The other piece that I know there's been a lot of questions about is around restrooms and locker room use. Happy to say students are no longer changing for physical education, which was a great thing that came out of COVID. That causes all sorts of issues that really have nothing to do with gender, but there's lots of things in locker rooms that we can avoid now by not having students change for PE. But again, as a part of that New York State education law that has been around since 2015, and actually dating back even prior to that, students in schools must be allowed to use a restroom that's connected to the gender that they identify with at school. Now, again, that doesn't mean that a student walks in and says, I decided I'm a girl today, and then a boy's going to walk into the girls' restroom. That's not what's happening in any of our schools. And I think it's important to know that even though this policy was in place since January, it really just brings to the policy level practices that have been going on for many years. So we've always worked really thoughtfully with students around as they're making these changes, and if we're having gender or name changes at school, talking through what makes the most sense for those students. Certainly we have students who come to us new and have come to us, and we may not know that if they were transgender, just like any adult that walks into our buildings, we would not know their sex status at birth. So students are going to use the restrooms that they consistently identify with during the school day. There's other pieces to the policy around things like if there's school trips, if there's overnight things. So those, again, are things we've been working with students and families on for years. We've always been able to work one-on-one to be able to find a situation and an agreement that makes sure that that student feels safe and that all other students feel safe. So we always make sure that we're looking at the big picture, that families are involved, and that we're making decisions on an individual basis. So every case is different, every student is different, and we want to make sure that we take those conversations and those situations very seriously, and have the conversations that we need to have to make the best decisions that we can for all of our students. So even though the law tells us that we have to allow students, just like they would in a restaurant, in an airport, at the gas station, right? People use the restroom that is connected to their gender identity. And the same thing is in place in school and has been in place in school for years. And we really don't see that as an issue. We haven't had issues with that when it comes to gender. However, knowing that, I know there's been a lot of questions out there. I think there's maybe some idea that this is a new practices. So you should at least rest assured that these are not new practices in our schools. All of our bathrooms have stalls, so there is privacy for all our students, and if any student has any concern about their privacy or their safety, we want that student to be able to, regardless of where they fall on the gender identity continuum, we want them to be able to feel very safe in school, especially when it comes to things like using the restroom. So you should certainly reach out if you have concerns, if your child has concerns, so that we can connect them to supports at school and make a plan for them. So that kind of highlights the big areas in the policy that I think are that people have the most questions around. The only other thing I would say is that the only real practice changes that came from this policy was that policy always gives us a little bit more teeth, I would say, to be able to make sure that certain things are in place in schools. So actually, the lines in here that say things like physical education will not be sex segregated and that classes will not be sex segregated, that's actually probably the pieces where any practice changes could be made. So we no longer have, and really shouldn't have had for years, boys 9th grade phys ed or girls 6th grade phys ed. That's based on state law, not the way that we should be dividing students for physical education. So we haven't been doing that. We've had co-ed classes, but this really helps to make sure that amongst 9 buildings, we don't end up with a scenario like that. Also, you know, as we took this policy through some of our student committees, through our GSAs, our students were able to tell us that there were places where they felt that there was sex segregation happening in classes. It's not that anyone's trying to harm anybody, but it's easy to say girls over here, boys over here, when there's really 100 different ways that we can divide students that don't cause harm to any of our students within that space who might be questioning who they are. So that really has helped us in that space to be responsive to our students, and certainly not taking anything away from any of our students, but just being able to be more mindful of our language. So some of the additional supports in schools, there's lots of group opportunities for students. We are very grateful to have a longstanding partnership with Pittsburgh Youth Services. One of the social workers there in particular has a lot of expertise in this area, offers training, which I'll talk about in a moment, but also offers groups for our students to be able to get together. And they're really in the realm of like a counseling group, support group for students that happen during the year. And we're actually able to carry those through the summer. So we're really grateful for those opportunities. There's gender sexuality alliance clubs or gay straight alliance clubs at our secondary schools. Those have been really amazing for our students, everything from bringing in guest speakers, having them do student-led activities in the building, but really giving voice to our students who are able to be a part of those clubs. You know, I've seen even just having GSA lunches for students who really don't feel comfortable in some of those larger environments in our schools, like cafeterias, where a lot of times it's less structured and it can be more harmful for students if they're able to have a really safe space to be able to continue to connect with their peers and their allies. And then I wanted to break out a little bit further training for staff. You may have heard of Safe Zone training. That's a pretty in-depth training that we've been running for, I'd say, about the last 10 to 12 years. We're really lucky to have Safe Zone be able to come in and if you see any of the little stickers on the doorways, you know that the staff have been trained in Safe Zone and in creating safe spaces for students. That continues this summer for our teachers. We have a robust teacher center. Teachers are in and out all summer participating in training. And Jeannie Gainberg, who is an author and expert in this area, she wrote a book called The Savvy Ally. If anyone's looking for additional information, we've done a couple of book studies on The Savvy Ally. We're always buying copies of it for staff and community. It's a very readable text. I think it's very user friendly, and it really helps to dig a little bit deeper into this area. So Jeannie is luckily for us very committed to being a part of training in the district. This year she's coming back and offering her pronouns training, and then she's actually offering a level 2 training because we've had so many staff that have been through the level 1, and it's really of such high interest. And then I did mention one of our Pittsburgh Youth Service social workers who's done training all across the area, from medical offices to colleges, private businesses. And he actually came in and did training for our 4 secondary faculties at the end of this, during the spring, was able to kind of go on tour to the different faculty meetings and do an abbreviated training for them, and offered for our paraprofessionals as well in our April Superintendent's Conference Day, an opportunity for them to be a part of that training also. And the other thing, big plug, we've been working on, under the direction of Melanie Ward, our Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, an equity series. So it's not necessarily specific to LGBTQ+ students, but it is around the culturally responsive sustaining education framework and creating that welcoming and affirming environment for our students, in terms of the environment, having a rigorous curriculum for all and high expectations for all. And so that series has been created by some of our in-house administrators and teachers. Will be running all summer. We've flooded the catalog with that. So everything from rating for equity to looking at student behavior and handling behavior for with an equity lens, handling challenging conversations in the classroom around equity. Lots of different opportunities for staff to have training this summer. And then exciting next steps, we have recently come off an Inclusivity Advisory Committee meeting, and we will be having more conversations this week around something that we're referring to as a gender support plan. I actually learned about this from actually some of our local experts, but then in working with other districts around students transferring to us, they were able to share some of their documents, and really felt like good timing to be able to slow down this process even a little bit more, to make sure that we're being more proactive and not waiting till something comes up to go to our students and ask how they would like something handled. So we have some great examples and some resources, and we have a collaborative committee with parents, administrators, students, teachers, and support staff who we're hoping going to be able to work together this summer to be able to draw out something that really is a more comprehensive plan for a student that allows, no matter what school you go to, no matter what level you're at, that anyone could be able to walk through, a family and a student through a plan. An example of one that I have is from Gender Spectrum. You can certainly find it online. But it talks about everything from how are we going to communicate around this? How do you want us to communicate to other school staff? What types of maybe class meetings need to take place? How we might handle siblings, what other types of supports people might need, and then a way for people to actually keep track of that plan and how it's going as it comes to fruition. So those are really our next steps. Fun summer project to be underway with. And once we have a draft of that plan and a proposal, that will go back to our Inclusivity Advisory Committee and all of our other feedback loops. So our student committees, we have student advisory committees at each school and the superintendent's committee. And then we have our leadership teams for staff as well, so that we can get lots of feedback along the way. And we would likely start slow with something like that. So maybe pilot at one building or one level, and be able to make changes as we get feedback from our students and our families.